This is our presentation on Charles White and our art criticism of his pieces. My name is Annika Williams, and I will be doing the narration of this project. Some background on Charles White. He is an American artist who is best known for his paintings and murals that reflect the African American culture in the United States during his lifetime. During this art history course, we've really focused on race as a large issue here in the United States, and Charles White seemed to do that in his paintings as well. He grew up in poor South Chicago, where his parents worked all the time and often left him in the library rather than hiring a babysitter. This is where his interest for education and the arts began. White got the opportunity to study at the Art Institute of Chicago when he won a scholarship from an art contest. He also won 2 other scholarships to study at different schools, but was denied because of his race. The career of Charles White was quite interesting. It all began with painting signs for a theater at the age of 14, where he was paid $75 per piece. About 5 years later, he moved on from there. In 1938, he was hired by FDR's Work Progress Administration. He began creating murals and paintings that celebrated African American culture in the United States. In 1941, he moved to New Orleans and taught art at Dillard University. From New Orleans, he moved several times to New York, to Mexico City, and to LA. Every city he lived in, he either sought further education or took a job as an educator. No matter what he was doing, he was always still creating those original pieces. Charles White has quite the legacy. In 1943, he finished his most infamous work of art, The Contribution of the Negro. Today, White's 12-foot by 7-foot mural is on display at Hampton University. White also has several murals and paintings on display, not just across the country, but across the world. In 2018, the Art Institute of Chicago staged an exhibition to show many of his works. This traveled across the country from New York to LA to show off his great pieces of art. When I initially saw Charles White's 1941 The Contribution of the Negro to Democracy in America, the piece that was just shown, it was overwhelming with the collection of historically important people and events throughout the lives of African Americans. The first item I noticed is how the overall tonal value of the painting leans more towards the negative side of the painting, which creates an overall more serious mood. His styles, themes, and passion has led to inspire artists like Carrie James Marshall. In general, by looking at this piece, you can tell that Charles White was trying to inform and never forget the history that followed African Americans. The most eye-popping scene is on the left-hand side. The scene is of African Americans chained up by the neck, following another African American. I believe that is regarding the practice of slave trading, not only in America, but in Africa through the transatlantic slave trade. In addition, White includes political symbolism at the bottom left-hand corner of the painting, an African American tearing the Provincial Congress document. This refers to the early formation of the 13 colonies in America. Also, the beginning of the long line of social injustice and stratification of African Americans. Besides that, abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass, Nathaniel Turner, Denmark Vesey, Harriet Tubman, and Peter Still are represented to showcase their climb and sacrifice for freedom. Overall, this piece makes me and other viewers feel shocked and disappointed that our nation treated people in an unjust and morally abusive way. When I look at this piece, I am reminded of everything I learned about slavery and feel sympathetic towards racial segregation. It reminds me how far we have come as a nation, but reinforces that as a community, we need to treat everyone how we would like to be treated and dispel any racial injustices that happen today. The Contribution of the Negro to Democracy in America is a mural located in Hampton, Virginia. The work features a series of Black men performing a variety of tasks, including marching as soldiers, playing instruments, and performing scientific experiments. The central figure kneels with one knee on the ground and a sheet of blue fabric in his hands. Behind him are two men holding a small baby that reaches out towards the sky, and a group of soldiers with their guns and bayonets. Flanking the soldiers are a large, lifelike Frederick Douglass on the left and Harriet Tubman leaning in from the right. Other major Black historical figures such as Nate Turner, Peter Still, and Denmark Vesey also appear. The artwork appears to be organized into left and right sections, separated by a central figure and the soldiers. On the left side, we see the harsher side of early African American history and the role that African Americans played in society at that time. At the bottom left, we see a man cutting into a document that reads Provincial Congress along the top. Above him, a man is falling victim to a bayonet-adorned gun, while another looks around fearfully on horseback. In the left middle section, we see 3 black men with chains around their necks, while a man with a torch and an angel with a sword fly above them. On the right side, the subjects of the mural are engaged in more lighthearted contributions to society. The man in the right bottom corner plays his guitar and sings, while the man above him smokes a cigarette. Above them is a man performing a chemistry experiment, while 3 pensive figures, 2 men and 1 woman, appear to the right of him. At the right center, we see an empty shackle, which mirrors the position of the chained man on the left side, and is shown next to Harriet Tubman, who reaches out to fearful figures on the right-hand side. Finally, a man at the top corner waves a flag that reads, "I will die before I submit to the yoke." Charles White may have organized the artwork to represent the chronological process of African Americans in society, or to represent the transition of going from forced contributions as slaves to willful contributions as free people. The positioning of Frederick Douglass's hand, which points from the left side towards the right side, may support this theory. The artist may have also chosen to present the subjects on 2 separate sides in order to represent 2 different ways in which African Americans have contributed to society, politically and culturally. Overall, the mood of the artwork seems to be both angry and triumphant. The Contribution of the Negro to American Democracy by Charles White depicts many famous Black people in American history. Featured in his artwork is Denmark Vesey, Nate Turner, Peter Salem, George Washington Carver, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass. All of these African American figures play an important role in American history and Reformation. Throughout Charles White's life, he wanted to bring awareness and appreciation to the Negro history. Thus, this painting highlights the hard work and strength of a well-known Black people in American history. In 1955, Charles White was quoted saying, "I would ask my teachers why they never mentioned a Negro in history. I would bring up the names of Denmark Vesey, Nate Turner, and Frederick Douglass. I would mention the painters Bannister and Tanner. My teachers answered smugly and often angrily. It had been deeply ingrained in them, as in me, in my first school years, that to be a Negro was something of which to be ashamed, that Negro people were inferior, illiterate, uncouth." Charles White's work is extremely symbolic. In the Contribution of the Negro to American Democracy, each person featured in his artwork is Black. He desired to portray the representation of Black people's contribution to life. One of the men is playing a guitar while singing. Another man is mixing chemicals. Another seems to be ripping legislation, while others are in military uniform, carrying guns, or on horses. There are Black people with chains around parts of their body, representing a long history of slavery. Also pictured is an angelic woman flying above the painting. Each of these actions shown in the painting represent the importance of Black people in history. He is also highlighting the major contributions of Black people in American history as well as democratic history, showing that Black people play a major role in creating democracy in America by highlighting the fact that African Americans have had a lack of education about Black people contributing to history. By looking at this Charles White piece, there obviously is a lot going on. The main thing that we notice that Charles White is trying to get across is pride in African American culture. But also the size of the painting emphasizes the importance of every person in the painting. The painting is 12 foot by 7 foot. Charles White also used this painting to accentuate Black history in a white dominant narrative, especially in regards to the time period it was created, 1943. Another thing important to note is the incorporation of chains to remember the past history of slavery and the continuation of discrimination. At first sight, I will admit, I was overwhelmed by the eventfulness of the art piece. The amount of detail that went into this work certainly affects the evaluation process. As I reflected back on the title of the work, The Contribution of the Negro to American Democracy, I understand that this is intended to affect White's work. Charles White was quoted saying, "Art must be an integral part of the struggle." As a result, my perceptions of this work have changed. The goal of using overwhelming imagery is meant to allude to the overwhelming contributions that African Americans made to our society. As mentioned earlier, while I found that the picture was a bit crowded, I realized that the experience of the image may depend greatly on how it's viewed. After taking a step back and looking at the image without focusing strongly on the individual details of the piece, I was able to see how the individual colors and shapes came together to create a different aesthetic experience, more than just the image is being realized detail by detail. I believe this is done to attract viewers from afar. Once entranced, the approaching audience is capable of analyzing White's political intent. The political message is made even more evident by the title of the piece, showing that this work highlights the involvement of people in the governing society. It is indeed the case that White's art is used as a tool to influence society. White believed that art had a role to play in changing the world. Art must be an integral part of the struggle. It can't simply mirror what's taking place. It must adapt itself to human needs. It must align itself with forces of liberation. The fact is, artists have always been propagandists. I have no use for artists who try to divorce themselves from the struggle. Expressionism is the aesthetic theory focused on expression by way of art. Under this theory, art serves as a medium to influence the audience's emotions. The grandeur of this piece and the personage involved, all of these invoke feelings of overbearing charisma in the sense of divinely conferred power of talent. The Contribution of the Negro to American Democracy by Charles White is successful in delivering the aesthetically pleasing experience while still delivering a powerful message about African Americans and their involvement in American society. After proper analysis, it became evident to me why this piece is White's most popular. White makes his opinions well known, both in his art pieces and on the internet, which made for an easy, simple, and clear evaluation process. This slide just breaks down who in the group worked on each piece. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope you take something away from it.